There is a strange ache born from pursuit, the kind that burns quietly beneath every almost, every unanswered message, every waiting glance at a phone that doesn't light up. The modern heart has turned longing into a ritual, mistaking obsession for devotion and pursuit for connection. But beneath it all, something older stirs, an archetypal hunger that whispers from the depths of the collective unconscious. If I chase her, I will finally be whole. And that is where the wound begins. The man who chases is not merely after love, he is after the reflection of himself that he lost long ago. The woman becomes the mirror, shimmering with the illusion of completion. Every word from her lips is an echo of what he craves to hear from his own soul. You are enough. But she can never give it, because love that must be chased cannot be received. It is born from lack, not abundance, from a shadow that mistakes motion for meaning. Have you ever noticed how the harder you reach, the further she drifts? How affection begins to fade the moment it is demanded. That is not rejection, it is law. The law of polarity. The feminine retreats when forced, not because she is cruel, but because the essence of love cannot exist where control has taken root. She withdraws to preserve something sacred, a boundary the masculine must learn to see, not break. And here lies the hidden cruelty of the chase. It is not her running that breaks him, but his own refusal to stand still. Because when a man cannot sit in his own stillness, he mistakes movement for life. He thinks love will find him if he only proves his worth through persistence. But the more he runs, the more love turns to smoke, untouchable, elusive, divine. Have you noticed how silence grows louder the longer you wait for an answer? That's the sound of your own soul begging you to stop running. The woman you chase begins to transform into something else, no longer a person, but a projection. The anima, Jung's term for the inner feminine, rises through her form, carrying your unhealed longing, your forgotten tenderness, your fear of being unseen. She becomes both angel and tormentor. Her absence feels like punishment. Her attention feels like salvation. But both are illusions, spun by the psyche to draw you inward, toward the truth you've been avoiding. Because she isn't the one who's running. You are. Running from stillness, running from silence, running from the unbearable simplicity of being enough as you are. It's a cruel paradox. The more he chases, the less he is seen. And the less he is seen, the more he chases. An endless loop spiraling through time, fed by desire and shame. But here's what few understand. When he finally stops, when he collapses into the weight of his own yearning, something extraordinary happens. The energy reverses, the polarity shifts, the current begins to flow back toward him. And in that stillness, something changes in her too. Because the feminine doesn't fall for pursuit, she falls for presence. And presence only blooms in the man who no longer needs to chase. But before that stillness can awaken, something inside must die. The image of himself as the savior, the illusion that love can be earned, the idea that longing is proof of depth. Every story of unrequited love is a story of self-abandonment, of chasing reflections while neglecting the source. Have you ever felt that strange exhaustion that comes after the chase? The quiet despair that no amount of attention can soothe? That's not heartbreak. That's the echo of your soul reminding you, love was never out there. It was always waiting in here. And yet, few reach this understanding without breaking first. The heart resists surrender. The ego clings to its narrative. If I can just make her see me, I will be enough. But love is not a negotiation. It is a mirror, one that refuses to lie. When you stop chasing, it's not that love comes running. It's that you finally turn to see the truth that was standing behind you all along. The silent, unmovable presence that doesn't need to be earned. But silence has another secret, one most men never survive. Silence. That's what remains when the chase ends. No validation, no echo of her laughter, no proof that you were ever seen, only the stillness, vast, unbearable, infinite. It is here that most men break, because in that stillness, every ghost they've been running from begins to speak. The boy who was never chosen, the son who learned to perform for love, the man who believed desire was proof of worth. They all rise from the depths, whispering the same haunting truth. You never learned to be without her. And isn't it strange how the silence of one woman can resurrect every wound you thought you had buried? Because what the psyche cannot integrate, it repeats over and over, different faces, same ache. He calls it attraction, but it is really recognition, the soul identifying its missing pieces in another body. The woman becomes the embodiment of what he has lost within himself. Softness, intuition, mystery, chaos. She is not just someone he wants, she is everything he disowned. Jung would call her the anima possession, when the inner feminine overtakes the conscious mind, flooding it with longing, fantasy, and projection. It feels like love. It feels divine, but beneath it lies obsession, the desperate attempt of a fragmented psyche to merge with its missing half. Have you noticed how what you desire most always seems to live in someone else? How the very qualities that draw you in are the ones you secretly feel you lack. That's the unconscious calling. That's your soul using love as a mirror. And the feminine, oh, she plays her role perfectly, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, because she carries the medicine even when she delivers it as pain. She pulls away so he can meet the void. She withholds so he can face his hunger. She disappears so he can finally see what remains when everything external is gone. This is not rejection, it is initiation. The man who cannot face loss will never know love, because true love requires the death of the illusion that love can complete you. When the chase collapses, the shadow awakens. He begins to see how his pursuit was never for her, it was for approval. How every act of devotion was a bargaining chip in a silent contract. If I give enough, maybe I'll be chosen this time. But love doesn't work in contracts. It works in resonance. Have you ever wondered why the moment you detach, people sense it, and suddenly they return? It's not magic, it's energy. When you stop orbiting someone's gravity, you re-enter your own. You become a sun again, not a satellite. And that changes everything. But this realization does not come gently. Before the rebirth, there is descent, a fall into the very depths of the psyche, where loneliness is not a feeling, but a landscape. Here, the man meets his shadow, the version of himself that he hides behind ambition, charm, and devotion. The part that is terrified of being unseen, unchosen, unneeded. He meets the truth that love was never his problem. Dependency was. And yet, even in this darkness, something sacred stirs, because the shadow does not appear to destroy, it appears to reveal. To show him that what he calls love has been a transaction between fear and fantasy. To show him that what he calls loss is really the loss of illusion. And isn't it strange that the breaking of your heart is also the opening of your eyes? That the one who hurt you is also the one who freed you from the lie. The psyche is cruel only to be kind, because it knows that without disillusionment, there can be no awakening. So the man descends. He stops calling, stops chasing, stops trying to prove. And in the silence that follows, he feels something unexpected, not peace, not yet, but clarity. He begins to see her not as the savior, but as the symbol. She was never meant to be possessed. She was meant to reveal. Through her absence, he finds his own presence. Through her withdrawal, he finds the edge of his dependency, But the shadow is not done, because once a man begins to awaken, the unconscious throws its final test, the temptation to return to the familiar. She will reappear, maybe not in body, but in memory, in dream, in the soft pull of nostalgia that whispers, maybe this time it will be different. And that is the moment of truth. Will he fall again into the chase, or will he stand still long enough to see that what he's been chasing was never love, it was himself? Because only when the pursuit ends does love begin to turn. Only when he stops grasping does she begin to move toward him, not as an object, but as energy, not as validation, but as resonance. But for that to happen, something within him must dissolve. The identity built on needing to be wanted. The man must die for the masculine to be born. And in that death, in that quiet collapse of ego and illusion, the story of love begins again, this time from stillness. But stillness carries a power most are not prepared to hold. Stillness, it is the space between heartbeats, between her last message and your last thought. It's the sound that follows when you finally stop reaching. Most call it emptiness, but those who have crossed through it know it is not empty at all. It is full of everything you've spent your life avoiding. When the chase ends, the noise dies, the body trembles, not from weakness, but from withdrawal, because love addiction is the oldest addiction there is, the addiction to being chosen. Have you noticed how silence can feel like rejection, even when no one said a word? That's the psyche mistaking stillness for abandonment, because from childhood we learned that movement meant safety, a mother's voice, a father's approval, a lover's attention. So when love grows still, the nervous system panics, as if life itself has stopped breathing. But here lies the threshold, the point where the spiritual begins to whisper through the psychological. Because what you call emptiness is not the absence of love, it's the absence of illusion. Alan Watts once said, when you stop chasing pleasure and pain, you find yourself sitting quietly in the middle of the river. That's the stillness that terrifies the unhealed, because it is the moment you realize nothing outside of you can complete you, and nothing inside you can be taken away. To the untrained heart, that realization feels like death, because in a way it is. The death of identification, the death of the one who needs to chase, the death of the man who measured his worth by her presence. He begins to see how the entire dance, the chase, the silence, the longing, was never about her. It was a cosmic trick, the universe using desire as a compass, pointing him inward, and the stillness is the return home. But most cannot bear it, because stillness asks nothing. It seduces with quiet. It reveals what motion once hid. Sit in stillness long enough, and you'll begin to feel the ache beneath every pursuit, the ache of separation, not from her, but from the self. The human story is the story of forgetting and remembering, of leaving the inner temple to worship at the altars of others, and then finding the courage to return. This is why love hurts, because love is the bridge that burns away illusion. When a man stops chasing, he doesn't stop loving. He begins to love differently. Not as hunger, but as presence. Not as seeking, but as seeing. And something extraordinary begins to happen in that shift. The feminine, once distant, elusive, untouchable, begins to sense him again. Because the feminine is not drawn to noise, but to gravity. And gravity is what he becomes when he is no longer seeking to be filled. Have you noticed how women can feel when a man is no longer trying to get something from them? That subtle ease, that grounded gaze, that quiet confidence that needs nothing, yet holds everything. That is the energy of stillness, and it is magnetic. The irony is cruel and beautiful. The moment he no longer needs her, she begins to feel drawn to him. Not because he played a game, but because he finally remembered who he is. Because the masculine is not meant to chase. It is meant to hold, to contain, to witness without grasping, to love without possessing. When he learns this, pursuit becomes presence, longing becomes devotion, and love, no longer a wound to be healed, becomes the quiet recognition of oneness. But stillness does not end the journey. It only changes the battlefield, because now the war moves inward, no longer between man and woman, but between the ego and the soul. The ego whispers, if I stay still, I will lose her forever. The soul answers, if you move now, you will lose yourself again. And isn't it strange how love begins to test you the moment you understand it? How silence grows tempting to break the moment it begins to teach. This is the sacred tension between the masculine and the feminine. The dance between doing and being, between pursuit and surrender. And the only way through is trust. To trust that love does not vanish when you stop running after it. To trust that what is real cannot be lost. To trust that stillness is not the end, but the beginning of love that moves toward you, not away. When he reaches this place, the world begins to look different. Every face he once chased now appears softer, almost translucent, as if they were all teachers in disguise. Every silence feels less like punishment and more like peace. He stops trying to fix the ache. He begins to listen to it. And in listening, he realizes something profound. The love he was chasing was never meant to come from her. It was meant to come through her, to awaken what already lived within him. But this awakening carries its own danger, because once you taste real peace, the old patterns will try to reclaim you through memory, through nostalgia, through the faint scent of her perfume in a dream, and if you're not careful, you'll mistake longing for love again. Because the final test of stillness is not silence, it's the return of noise and whether you move. Because only one truth remains. Love begins to chase you the moment you stop needing it to arrive. But what happens when it does? When love, real love, the kind that mirrors your wholeness, not your wound, finally returns. Few are ready for that. It doesn't return as a storm. It comes quietly, softly, like light touching the surface of still water, unannounced, effortless, without demand. Love, when it returns, no longer feels like a pursuit. It feels like recognition, like something ancient waking in you that says, ah, there you are. It's no longer the desperate ache of wanting someone to choose you. It's the still realization that you have always been chosen by existence itself. But to stand in that truth, to truly receive love without grasping, requires a depth the ego cannot comprehend. Because when love returns, it no longer feeds your fantasy. It reveals your soul. Have you noticed how, after all the chaos, real love feels almost ordinary? Not the kind that burns through your veins, but the kind that feels like coming home after lifetimes of wandering. That's the paradox. The love you once begged for, the one you thought would complete you, arrives only when you no longer need completion. Because love is not a rescue. It is a reflection of self-possession. She feels it too, the feminine. Something in her softens when the masculine stands still, not in apathy, but in calm. Not because he turned away, but because he finally turned inward. The dance begins again, but this time without fear. She moves toward him, not to test his devotion, but to meet his depth. He holds her gaze, not to win her, but to see her, not the projection, not the symbol, but the living being before him. And that simple act, seeing without seeking, becomes the purest form of love. Have you ever noticed how peace between two souls feels heavier than passion? Not dull, but deep, like gravity, pulling them towards something beneath words. That's what happens when both have met their shadows. They no longer cling out of fear, they connect out of presence. The woman who once withdrew now moves freely because his stillness no longer feels like threat. It feels like safety. And the man who once chased now stands firm because her beauty no longer awakens hunger. It awakens gratitude. This is love after the chase. It does not beg, it does not perform, it breathes, and yet it is not without tension. Because true love doesn't erase polarity, it refines it. The feminine will still test as the moon tests the tide. The masculine will still be tempted to move, to prove, to pursue. But now he knows. He knows that movement without awareness breaks the spell. He knows that love is not sustained by effort, but by alignment. Have you noticed how, in moments of deepest connection, time disappears? That's not coincidence. That's presence, erasing the need to measure. Because when love is born from wholeness, it no longer exists in time. It exists through it. Each breath, each glance becomes a ceremony. But this kind of love, calm, unwavering, alive, terrifies the half-healed because it demands authenticity. It demands that you stay when the masks fall. It demands that you love without the story. The man who has descended and returned knows this truth. Love does not save you. It mirrors you. Whatever still hurts within you will rise again, not as punishment, but as invitation. And isn't it strange how the very stillness that once felt like death now feels like freedom? How what used to feel like emptiness now feels like peace. That is the quiet miracle of awakening. The same silence that once broke you now holds you. The same love that once escaped you now flows through you. Because now love no longer chases or flees. It moves in rhythm with awareness. The masculine, steady and grounded, becomes the mountain. The feminine, fluid and free, becomes the river that shapes it. Neither dominates, neither dissolves. They dance endlessly, wordlessly, in the eternal cycle of giving and receiving. And somewhere in the background of that divine movement, the echo of the old you fades. The chaser, the seeker, the beggar of affection. He is gone, not destroyed, but integrated, transformed into the quiet strength of a man who no longer needs to be needed to love deeply. But love, in its mysterious grace, has one final revelation, the one most never reached because it cannot be taught, only lived. It is the realization that love in its purest form is not something between two people. It is the space in which they meet. Have you ever felt that the invisible presence that surrounds when two souls simply see each other? No games, no chasing, just presence. That space is the divine itself, the eternal witness, the silent consciousness in which the dance unfolds. And the moment you see this, everything changes. Love is no longer a path to follow. It becomes the ground you walk on. You stop asking, when will love find me? Because you realize love was the one watching you all along, waiting for you to stop running. But even this piece carries a final whisper, a final paradox, because stillness, once embodied, attracts what the old you could never hold. And when love begins to move toward you again, radiant, alive, undeniable, the question returns, will you grasp it or will you let it flow? Because the story of love is not about finding or losing. It is about remembering how to stay when love finally finds you. And what happens when you no longer chase and love begins to chase you? That too carries a secret most are not ready to hear. The secret is this: when love begins to chase you, it is not love trying to reach you. It is your own essence returning home. The chase was always a mirror. All along, what you pursued in others was the reflection of your forgotten divinity, dressed in flesh and fragrance, in eyes that reminded you of eternity. Now, as love turns its gaze toward you, something deeper awakens. Not pride, not relief, but reverence. You no longer want to own love. You want to honor it because you've seen how fragile it becomes when held too tightly. Have you noticed how the moment you try to define love, it slips through your fingers? It's because love is not meant to be known. It is meant to be lived, to move through you like breath through open lungs. The man reborn from stillness learns this instinctively. He no longer builds from fear. He no longer performs to be chosen. He lives in alignment with something sacred, unshakable, the awareness that what is his will meet him without force. The world feels different now. Colors soften, voices lose their urgency. Even longing feels gentler, like a quiet friend rather than a wound. Because longing in its pure form was never meant to hurt. It was meant to remind you of how vast your heart truly is. The feminine feels it too. Something in her responds when the masculine returns to himself. His stillness calls to her movement like gravity calls to the moon. She doesn't understand why. She just feels it, that quiet pull toward safety, toward the energy that does not demand her to shrink. And this time the dance is different. No one is chasing. No one is fleeing. There is only meeting. Energy flowing toward energy, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Have you ever felt someone look at you, not to take, not to compare, but simply to see? That is what happens when two awakened energies meet. They no longer mirror wounds. They mirror essence. It's no longer you complete me. It becomes, I remember myself through you. And from this place, love becomes something rarer than passion, peace. The peace that comes when two beings no longer need each other to survive, yet choose to meet in the middle of their freedom. The peace that does not seek to own, to bind, to prove. It simply is. But this peace carries a quiet power, one that terrifies those still lost in pursuit. Because when love no longer requires drama to exist, the ego loses its grip. There are no games to play, no roles to perform, only truth. And truth, raw and unguarded, is far more intimate than desire. Have you noticed how real intimacy is not born in passion, but in presence, in the silence between two breaths, in the moment you no longer need words to understand each other? That silence, the one that used to feel unbearable, now becomes holy, because it is not the absence of connection, but the space where connection breathes. The man who has walked through longing, loss, and illusion now knows love that must be chased is love unready to be received. Love that moves toward you freely is the reflection of your own wholeness. And so he waits, not passively, but with open awareness. He no longer prays for love to find him. He simply makes himself a place where love can land. He becomes the quiet field, the mountain that doesn't move when the storm comes, the open sky beneath which all things return. And the feminine, sensing this stillness, feels safe enough to unfold, not as an idea, but as her truest self. Her laughter becomes unguarded. Her softness no longer feels like risk, because his presence does not devour, it witnesses. This is the divine union, not a merging, but a meeting, not a consuming, but a remembering. Two souls, once split by fear, now orbiting in rhythm, not because they complete each other, but because they understand the same silence. And isn't it strange how love begins to chase you only when you've stopped asking for it, as if it was always waiting just beyond your resistance, patient as the dawn. This is the paradox of awakening. The more you let go, the more you are given. The more you stop needing, the more you attract what is true. Because the universe does not respond to desperation. It responds to resonance. And resonance can only exist where stillness lives, When love finally begins to chase you, it's not a reward, it's recognition. It's life saying, you've remembered what you are. And from here, everything changes. Every love becomes sacred. Every silence becomes music. Every goodbye becomes grace. Because the chase is over, and in its place, there is only awareness. The awareness that love was never a destination, but the mirror that led you home. What once felt like loss now breathes like liberation. And in her silence, he finally hears it, the sound of his own soul returning home.